Welcome. My name is Michael, and on this channel I teach you how to be a professional artist. Today we're going to talk about postmodernism. It's a very tricky and evolving topic that is going to be very difficult to describe and isn't fully possible to describe, but I'm going to do my best here, and I hope that you guys will find this valuable. First, let's define what modernism is and postmodernism, and then before we move into what is postmodernism. All of these terms, modernism, postmodernism, refer to time periods and then the culture within those time periods. And so what they allow you to do is they allow you to think about commonalities that we see across culture during those time periods. Modernism is something that happened around 1880, 1890, all the way up to maybe around 1960. Now, to give these references, I'm going to specifically talk about culture within the United States, just because there's so much to cover. They're so broad, they're such huge terms. That's one of the reasons why people don't talk about them enough. We have this period in modernism from around the 1880s to around the 1950s, 1960s, depending upon who you ask. We're going to view them through the lens of self-identity for this one. But there's a lot of different ways to view them, and so you can use modernism and postmodernism as lenses to look critically at everything. But today we're going to just talk about self-identity as a way of making sense of it. In the time of modernism, people really start to go and identify as individuals. I know that sounds kind of silly and weird and kind of strange to say. That hasn't really always been the case throughout history. It is this period that we start to see the advent of expressionism and then eventually abstract expressionism, which is its kind of logical extreme. This is where people really start to care about what they want and their needs. And the art that comes out of it reflects it. You have jazz, which is all about the individual and, or the group and the band and what it is that they're experiencing and going through. And traditional composition is disregarded for what is most enjoyable for the people playing and what is it that they're going through and they're experiencing and their response to the music that's happening. The same could be said for art at the time. You have expressionism, which is literally about expressing yourself. It's about the individual. I also want to say that modernism is about individualism and about self-identity, but primarily for white people. It's a very white, homogenized, dominated set and time period where it's okay to be yourself, but really during that time period, it's okay to be yourself only if you're a white person, preferably a white male. And that's just the era of the time. So then what is postmodernism? Post means after. So what comes after modernism? What happens at the end of modernism is, especially in art, let's talk about painting. You have Jackson Pollock, who is literally just throwing paint onto a canvas. This is my expression. And it seems ridiculous. And that's because it is. It's the extreme. It's a caricature of what modernism represents. It's my expression is so valuable that it's literally just my expression. There's no thought, there's no intention, it's just expression all over this page. And there's more to his work. I'm actually really fascinated by his work, and there's a reason his work is worth millions. He's like a proto-performance artist. There's so much fascinating going on. He's putting his canvases on the floor, but there are many articles coming out in the 50s that Jackson Pollock broke modern art, and he really is the last modern artist. And for the majority of the 50s, there was actually a giant slump of art in that time period where people couldn't quite figure out how to proceed after Jackson Pollock because it's just so extreme. It's such a caricature. So then we have postmodernism. It took about to the 1960s to be able to figure out what postmodernism is. And so that's where this identity that people hold becomes fractured and split. And so people are no longer just themselves. They're all these other things. Another huge thing that happens is while modernism was so focused on the future and the present, think of all of the futurism that was happening in the 1940s and 50s in America, where they were talking about flying cars and the nuclear family and progress. In the 1960s through, honestly, kind of now, we're just starting to change in postmodernism, you start to have a moment of self-reflection. And so we actually become time travelers backwards in time. And we think about where it is that we come from and who are we based on our, how our identity is based off of our past. For example, it is a common thing in America to ask, where's your family from? Or what are you? And people will say, what are you? Say, well, I'm Italian and I'm Irish and I'm Polish. I say where my family was from a couple hundred years ago. I don't say, or I say, well, I grew up in this town. The question was like, what are you? Who are you? Not where are you from? Who is your family? Not your history. You become time travelers. You start to really think about, like, culturally, it becomes about identifying with who you were in the past. Moving forward into postmodernism, this is where we're going to be moving into the future, and this is kind of brought upon by the effects of globalization, where the whole world is connected and is becoming increasingly more connected and increasingly more diverse. People, especially in the millennial generation and the new generation coming up, Gen Z or iGen or whatever, they're not really identifying in the same way that, Gen X was, where Gen X would say, well, I'm Italian and Irish, living in America, I've lived here for 200 years. They're going to say, I'm a graphic designer, or I'm a YouTuber. People in this generation are defining it based off of where they are going in the future. This is an idea I got from the book Radicants by Nicolas Bourriaud, and he actually did an exhibition in the Tate back in 2008 about this. A radicant is a plant that moves its roots based off of where it's growing. For example, a vine. It's something where it changes where it is, where its home is, based off of where it wants to go. When you're thinking about your identity, you define yourself based off of where you want to be. Your family is your chosen family, not your ancestral family. Now, it's not to say that people don't still value their ancestral family. That's still super important, especially for a lot of cultures. But as a global trend, when you are asking people to define themselves, they are much more likely to define themselves to be where they want to go versus where they're from. And so I think that that's really fascinating and worth talking about. The other thing that Nicolas Bourriaud lines out in his book is the difference between a radicant and a radical. A radical, which is very much the hero of postmodern, is someone who actually goes backwards in time. They want to return to old values. They feel like the world is corrupt and they want to return to a better time, whereas a radicant wants to move forward again. So if you look, modernism is about moving forward, and then postmodernism is about looking back, and then postmodernism is about moving forward again. But in a different way, because what happens is, during that postmodernism, everything becomes splintered and fragmented. So modernism is this whole roundness, and then it becomes splintered and fragmented in postmodernism. And then from that postmodernism, all of these different splinters can connect in new and exciting and interesting ways that could never happen before. For example, I can talk to you on YouTube, and you can find me, you can find other videos all below me, and we're all related, we're all connected in a way that is like fascinating and never possible 50 years ago. That's really one of the powers of social media, but I don't want to say that social media is driving this change, or it's more that this change is happening in our generation, and the way that social media is built reflects that change. People are going to become more and more connected regardless of whether or not they have Facebook or Instagram or YouTube. It's the nature of the internet, it's the nature of all technology, it's the nature of phones. It's the nature of cultural shifts changing so that people of different races and different religions can be friends, different cultures in different countries, and having access to different stories. You can turn on your phone and learn about news from all around the world. That change in cultural identity allows you to identify with people that you could normally never identify with. I have friends from all around the world, and I can do that because we have a commonality. We both love art. Whereas 100 years ago, I really would have thought, oh no, that person is different, so I wouldn't want to be their friend. But now I want to be their friend because we both love art. So I know that was probably super confusing and maybe not the best explanation. That's the way that I like to think about it. I'd love to make a follow-up video on this. That's what postmodernism is. It's about connecting all of the fragments caused by postmodernism, being future-oriented and moving your roots. Be sure to subscribe. I have new videos coming out every single day. Hit the bell, and I hope you have a wonderful day.